Hello everyone, friends. In this video, I want to answer two questions. Where will Bitcoin go during the current correction ultimately, and what is the target for its subsequent growth, and accordingly, when that will happen? Let's start the analysis with previous expectations with the last video I posted. That was back in November. And on the left actually is the chart as it was marked up at that time. Up until the last moment, I was expecting the diagonal to play out, meaning the formation of a moving correction and the possibility of the uptrend continuing, and the key level that would invalidate this pattern was at 9,555. On the chart to the right, you can see that the subsequent movement resulted in a breakout, meaning the scenario was invalidated, ruling out the possibility of renewed growth and essentially the previous scenario. After that, it was necessary to redo the markup and reconsider my outlook on the cryptocurrency market as a whole. As it turned out, now, after this decline, we consider the growth cycle that began in 2022 to be completely finished. Further assessment of the structure and targets of the decline depends on which larger cycle this movement was part of. And that is precisely why this factor will determine the scale, depth, and duration of the upcoming correction, the very correction that will continue into 2026. Scenario number 1, in which we consider a large diagonal completed by wave 3, is essentially the main scenario that I am currently following. That is, at the end of 2025, the cycle of wave 3, which consisted of a double WXY pattern, was completed, and in fact the correction, wave 4, began. For the ending diagonal pattern, the formation of the current fourth wave implies a decline or correction averaging about 50% of the entire rise. This is the level of 71.045. But wave 4 of the diagonal should not exceed the 62% mark, that is 57,780. These are the key reference points in this scenario. The time factor is no less important and should also be taken into account here. Wave 4 should take less time than wave 2. If we align them in the same way, our reference point is up to October 26th. At this point, I want to conclude that there is a high probability that the first half of 2026 will be negative for crypto and for Bitcoin, moving sideways and then declining. Accordingly, this needs to be taken into account. If you are holding a portfolio, if you still believe in the growth of altcoins, they will be the first to fall. The second scenario, friends, is that we are seeing a series of initial impulses forming, and all of this has been happening since 2019. And in the case of a classic impulse formation, the correction does not have a strict time limit. Usually it is shorter, actually, meaning we could finish before October, which is why I said half a year. But at the same time, the same target area remains, on average 62% from the last trend from the last movement, which is 57,850. An additional important condition is that the price must maintain its dynamics within the wave, and in fact, it is possible for the correction to end at the boundary. It is precisely the combination of these factors that will confirm the correctness of the impulse formation. That is, the size of the correction and the place where it ends relative to the upward movement. Now let's combine all the conclusions on a single chart and add volumes as a control tool for assessing the correction. On the chart, you can see the most significant nearby area where the price may stop. We are not considering subsequent levels in the case of some extreme movements. We are taking the minimum sufficient correction that must occur in any case, and in the current configuration, the cluster of volumes indicates an increased likelihood of a shallower correction than I mentioned earlier a couple of minutes ago. The key level, or more precisely, the range in this case will be from 57,850 to 67,565. From the perspective of subsequent growth targets, the situation remains less certain. It will be important for us to understand the exact pattern, the structure of the correction, and how it unfolded. However, if we assume a scenario in which the correction amounted to exactly 62% of the last upward movement, that is from 2023 to 2025, in this case there are two scenarios, diagonals and a classic impulse, which will have the following targets. The minimum is 134,000, in the range up to 143.5, and in the case of a classic impulse developing, it's 237 to 440, with the possibility of going even higher, that is, up to those very 250,000. These levels will become relevant only after the correction is complete, that is, closer to the middle of 2026. In conclusion, let's look at the local section, the price dynamics, specifically the decline since October 25th, that is, how the entire drop unfolded. According to classic logic, this decline should be represented by a corrective three-wave structure. The first part, wave A, has already formed. A break of the dashed red line indicates that it has been completed. Taking into account the current structure and volume levels, the corrective growth could reach the range of 108.5 to 111,000 per Bitcoin. Although reaching these levels is not mandatory, that is, if we transition into some kind of sideways movement or a diagonal, we could complete this correction much earlier, around 104 to 105,000. After the correction is complete, I expect the downward trend to resume with the targets I mentioned earlier. In other words, this should happen in any case. It's important to understand that when Bitcoin declines, altcoins usually lose value more significantly and much faster. To avoid missing key market moves and always stay up to date with the latest scenario analysis, subscribe to my Telegram channel. The link is below this video. It only takes a moment, and staying informed gives you the chance not only to avoid losses, but even to profit. This was Dimitri with you. Thank you, and see you next time. Bye.